Welcome back to the Anxiety Slayer podcast. I'm Shann Vanderleek, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Phil Stark, former screenwriter, therapist, and author of Dude, Where is My Catharsis? Phil started out writing film and television comedy nearly 20 years ago, working on shows like South Park and that 70s show. And then a midlife career change came around, and he went back to graduate school to study psychology, and that led to his role as associate marriage and family therapist in LA. Dude, Where's My Catharsis is a guide to talk therapy, providing insight based on Phil's work as a therapist, experience as a lifelong therapy client, and writing style and voice developed over the years as a screenwriter. Welcome to Anxiety Slayer, Phil.
Thanks for having me.
We absolutely have to start with your journey. How you made your way from screenwriter to therapist. I'd really like to start there.
It's a great story, and it's funny, when you read the title of the book, Dude, Where's My, which I now say Car-tharsis. I think I maybe invented a new word. I can't even say catharsis anymore. I can't pronounce it correctly. But the joke amongst my friends is that it's almost as if my previous 20 years of screenwriting was just a setup for the idea of a title for a book about my work as a therapist. So it's a very, very long, slow burn setup for a joke. But I love my story. I mean, I was so lucky, and I dreamt of being a screenwriter, and I got my foot in the door, and then I pushed it open, and then I had a career. But one of the things about the entertainment industry, and maybe other industries, is they often don't tell you when you should think about doing something else. And so while I'm very happy with what I achieved in my career as a screenwriter, I never really considered the fact that I might not retire as a screenwriter. And I didn't know what I would do with that time. And so it was sort of a long struggle to figure out what I would like to do in my life, sort of what people would describe as a midlife crisis. And now that I found therapy, it all really makes sense.
That's awesome, isn't it? When you don't know where the path is leading, and then all of a sudden you're on it, you're in it, and it's like, oh yeah, right on.
Yeah, I'm very big on the path metaphor. A lot of my book and a lot of my work is about finding metaphors and figures of speech to help illustrate for clients what are really, hard to grasp, very ethereal topics. And one of them is our path in life. And I love the idea that I can work with a client who is feeling stuck. They feel like they're at a dead end. And we can reflect on where we've come in the path and how we might have seen that before and how we have found our path, and the knowledge that our path will lead us somewhere, even though our frustration is that we don't know where it is. So I love that metaphor of life being like a hiking up a mountain.
Mm-hmm. With lots of stops for water and support from a friend to maybe carry your ass up the rest of the way sometimes.
It's true.
Perhaps a therapist to walk alongside of you.
Yes, I'm the guy sort of sitting up there in a cave with people who stop by and need direction.
I love that. Well, congratulations on your book. I'd love for you to tell us how Where's My Car-tharsis is changing lives.
Well, I started writing this book when I started graduate school, actually. And I find a lot of connection between the book and screenwriting because, especially comedy, a lot of comedy is about presenting a different way of looking at a common subject, which in that case is a joke. And it means to make you funny and describe how a character has a different outlook on things that is humorous. And I find that in my work, just like this path metaphor, I was talking to a client recently who was feeling really stuck and blocked and having a really hard time. And we talked about how their path in life has led them to this moment, but right now the path is really steep and very difficult. And we talked about, well, do we want to continue to go in this direction? Can we find an easier way to go and trust that it might eventually link up with the path that we needed that was on the other side of that very difficult part to get through? Sometimes we really slog through life and we need to get through it, but other times we need to assess, can we go around this? Did we choose the path we wanted, and are we not adjusting as we continue on the path?
Yeah. Well, that's such a
Um,
good point too, because we do sometimes get stuck thinking this is the only way. And then we're just completely running into wall after wall or boulder after boulder, whatever it is. And just like, my
mhm,
goodness, is it really supposed to be this air quotes hard, right? And then,
mhm,
oh, hey, what do you know? There might be a path around this.
mhm, and it's
Maybe, I
all
mean, you're still going through it, but you're going around and getting to where you're going in a different direction, perhaps.
right. When you say, maybe how does the book affect people? Like, for instance, I remember that when I was coming to the end of my screenwriting career, in retrospect, I that's all I could see myself doing. I really had the blinders on. I never really thought about, well, could I do something else? I would always
Mm-hmm.
write another script or, develop another pitch. And meanwhile, the whole time I'm pretty unhappy. I'm the guy slogging up this horrible tree-ridden, quicksand-laden path, but not realizing, well, maybe there's another path I can go on.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is, you look around, there are no other paths. So it can take time to look for those and find those. And you have to trust that there's going to be one, or otherwise it's terrifying just to stop
Sure.
on the road of life. So that's something I often share with clients, about that metaphor specifically.
And so your book then in sharing the story of the path and then of course your life and your example of changing
Mhm.
things up
Mhm.
has to be really helpful for those that you spend your time with.
I like to think so. I mean, the book is a friendly and engaging guide to talk therapy. It's really for people who maybe have never experienced talk therapy or just getting into it. And it's also for people maybe who are in it, appreciate it, can maybe find a nugget or a chapter that speaks to their experience. And sometimes I will be working with a client and I will describe something in a way that makes me realize that could be a good chapter, a good
Mm-hmm.
metaphor to help explain a particular psychological concept. And oftentimes it's the client saying, like, oh, I get what you're saying. It's like X, Y, or Z. And I'm like, yes, that's an even better way to put it. I'm going to steal that and put it in another book. I think many people have preconceptions or ideas about what talk therapy is. And I think demystifying it to a certain extent and explaining what the process is like in a way that's friendly and engaging, I feel like maybe it's something that people, especially in the climate nowadays with a new appreciation for mental health, might be interested in.
Right. Finally, an appreciation of mental health.
Mhm.
It's been interesting to watch the conversation change over the years. Ananga and I have been producing Anxiety Slayer now for over 13 years, and it's definitely a different conversation right now. Still,
Yeah, yeah.
in our opinion, not quick enough, but we're grateful to see how things are changing and grateful for authors like you and therapists like you who are making it easier to access, making it more accessible, more understandable. Like this is what you're looking at. This is what it's all about. It's not the stigma of, oh my God, you're going to a shrink, or
Shrink,
or
right.
being told by parents perhaps or other people in your life, role models in your life who think that it's a weakness when it actually is a strength
Right.
to ask for help.
No, now therapy is a badge of honor, not a badge of shame anymore. I mean, I keep reading
Absolutely.
things about men putting on their dating profiles that they're in therapy and how women see that. I'm like, oh, I love that. That's great. So
Right?
it's really interesting how it's the attitude has changed.
Yeah. Well, because when you think about how wonderful it is to look at what makes us tick and to become better beings, better human beings in our own way and how we care for ourselves and others, take a look, not to be so afraid of what's going on under the hood. What recurring mental health themes are showing up for you right now as you're working with married couples and working with families in your practice?
Well, honestly, this time of the year, I always do a holiday check.
Yeah.
Some people, the holiday triggers difficulties related to family. Some people experience that through their partners. And some people just love the holiday season.
Hmm.
And those are very pleasant conversations to have as well, but necessary. So there's sort of an end of the year vibe to it. And I always pitch my clients on this to the end of the year. I ask them about New Year's resolutions, and we talk about how resolutions, usually sort of described as, I'm going to go to the gym more. I'm going to eat this. I'm going to go on this diet. And it's very binary. Either you do it or you don't.
Yeah.
But I like to pitch clients the idea that we could talk about New Year's goals and talk in more general terms about wanting to live a healthier lifestyle or wanting to create a diet that they feel good about themselves with.
Yeah, setting up intentions instead of resolutions. I kind of threw away resolutions years and years ago. So yeah, I completely understand and agree with you on that.
And what I really enjoy about that is not so much the beginning of the year, but the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
For years, I've done this with my kids, where we sit down at the beginning of the year and we write our New Year's intentions. I love that. And the best part is at the end of the year, looking at those and saying, well, this was my intention and I ended up doing what I wanted to do with that. Or, oh, this was my intention, but it turned out that it really wasn't something that I was so into.
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, you know what? I ended up really doing this, which I hadn't even thought about it at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And it's so much healthier, I think, a way to sort of give ourselves a focus over the year and sort of identify what we want and don't want to achieve without it being so binary as I did this or I didn't do this. I failed or I didn't fail.
Right. And it's so awesome too, to get to the end of the year and allow yourself to explore what you accomplished, how you've grown, the choices that you've made along the way to get closer to whatever those intentions are. Because oftentimes we just kind of go, yeah, and I did that, and I did that, and I did that, and we didn't, and I wrote a book, and then I did, and we don't take time to celebrate some of what we've done and who we've become and how far we've come along whatever path it is we're on. After this quick break, we're going to come back and talk a little bit more about social anxiety and tips that Phil might have for us, especially those of us who dread social gatherings over the holidays. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you sometimes wish life came with an operating manual? Sometimes we all need some guidance or a neutral party to help us work things out. BetterHelp online therapists are trained to help you figure out the cause of challenging emotions and to help you learn productive coping skills. Having worked with BetterHelp in the past, at the beginning of the pandemic when my daughter was going off to college, I felt heard and fully supported navigating through that transition. As the world's largest therapy service, BetterHelp has matched 3 million people with professionally licensed and vetted therapists, available 100% online. Plus, it's affordable. All you have to do is fill out a questionnaire to match with a therapist. If things aren't clicking, you can easily switch to a new therapist anytime. It really couldn't be simpler. No waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/slayer. That's betterhelp.com/slayer. Hey, Phil, before the break, we were talking a little bit about recurring mental health themes that are showing up right now. And one that you brought up was about the holidays and some of the anxiety that comes with spending time with family and social gatherings and all that comes with it, all of the trappings. Can we talk a little bit more about that and how, or what kind of tips or offerings that you might have for those of us who just really struggle with that?
Yeah, sure. And this is great because it relates to a more general thought about therapy, which is clients wanting to know how and what they can do to change the things about themselves they want to change. Oftentimes, clients will crave specific interventions, we call them in clinically, or just tips, tricks, things to do. And what we then do is I say, that's great. Let's talk about that. And we get into maybe the sources of anxiety, personal, historical, familial, social, we really work in therapy to develop a greater understanding of why we feel anxious, what it feels like, or what the roots are, what a situation that produces anxiety in the present draws from a historical situation in the past, oftentimes with our parents, our caregivers, our family. And a lot of my work is understanding why that anxiety appears. And oftentimes we'll get to a point where we develop that awareness, and then the client will say, well, what do I do? How do I stop it? And I say, well, part of the way we do that is we're doing it right now. We're developing this greater sense of awareness, knowledge, self-knowledge, that ideally in the future, you might find yourself in the exact same position as you had the year before that produced a lot of anxiety. But now that we've done a lot of work on ourselves and really come to appreciate why we might feel anxious, what the analogs are, how the anxiety we're feeling here might not really be from this situation, but from a source in our childhood or our past. Just that awareness can help us somehow engage in the situation differently. And while there are certainly so many great approaches, especially with some of the cognitive behavioral therapy approach to therapy, which really involves a lot of identifying our thoughts and working on concrete ways to deal with that, which I also incorporate. My personal favorite is just the idea that just by knowing ourselves better, understanding what makes us tick, will allow us to maybe change the way we tick or feel like we're ticking differently in situations that in the past had been harder.
Right. Well, that's really helpful. A lot of what's been coming up from our listeners is, oh my goodness, what do I do? My family is crazy because of politics and the political divide, and how do I go? And I want to go and really enjoy my parents, but they're on the other side of the aisle, and my dad can be so crazy, blah blah blah, all the things that I don't even need to say the words, right? What kind of advice do you have for people who are in that situation? And as you can imagine, there are a lot of them listening in right now.
Oh, absolutely. And this makes me reflect on me learning what it meant to be a therapist.
Cool.
As a comedy writer, for instance, it was always about trying to figure out how I would respond to something. What's my take? What's my pitch? And in real life, oftentimes when people are confronted with somebody who's angry, they feel like they need to justify their own opposition to that anger, or discuss the other person's anger in a way that reflects what I think. That's a lot of our modern adult conversations are. It's a two-way street. We're talking about what somebody does and how it affects us, and vice versa. My work as a therapist has been amazing for my own personal growth individually, because when I sit with a client, let's say I'm sitting with a client and they're expressing their anger about politics, and my instinct might be to say, well, but don't you see it's not like that? Or, well, actually, what about this point of view? But that's not my job as a therapist. As a therapist, I'm there to just sit with those feelings, to acknowledge them, to support them, whether I agree with them or not. And that's something that I've been able to bring into my personal life. In fact, I had a holiday season where I have relatives who are relatively conservative, and there's a generational gap. And I feel much less anxious about those family gatherings now, because I don't feel the need to defend my thoughts and my point of view, or to express what I think is wrong or uninformed about my relative's point of view.
Right. You can just let it be. You can let it be an interesting point of view.
Yeah. And the metaphor I use with that is it's as if there's a fire, and the back and forth, the arguing, the debates fans that fire. So there's some power to sit and just accept it, support it, acknowledge it. You don't have to think it's right or wrong. But what I'm doing is I'm not fanning the fire. And oftentimes when somebody is confronted with somebody who doesn't agree or disagree with them, but simply listens, the fire tends to go down. So it can be very frustrating when you feel like you're right and you want to explain to somebody else why you think you're right and why they're wrong. And no matter how objectively true or important the issues you're talking about are, the dynamic is a fire. I take a lot of solace now in being able to just, even if I sit and nod, it doesn't mean that I believe the stuff that they're talking about.
Right.
I'm just letting them, it's almost like I'm supporting them by just letting them talk about it.
Right. Like it's a controlled burn.
Right. Which hopefully eventually you run out of grass.
Right. Right. I love that. Let's talk a little bit about how therapy and partnering with a therapist can help a family or a marriage or an individual who wants to just finally once and for all learn how to calm their mind so that they can get on with their life and find some more joy and spaciousness versus feeling so boxed in by their stress and anxiety.
Well, I'm reflecting now on my work with couples and specifically talking about issues that might drive couples to conflict. And whatever the issue is, we often realize in our work together that while the issue might be the specific incident in front of them, the way they react to it often has less to do with that incident and more to do with how they were programmed to respond to incidents like it growing up. A client has a hard time supporting his partner, let's say. Whenever his partner gets angry, our client has a difficult time dealing with that. And they become angry. It's a classic dynamic of meeting anger with anger, right? So we might talk about, well, is the issue really that the car was parked in a different spot than the one you were expecting? Is this anger appropriate for a level of conflict for that thing? No, it's usually not. How were you exposed to anger growing up? What was your childhood experience like with your parents modeling how to deal with anger? How do they handle anger? How do their parents handle anger? How what you are taught and shown how to deal with anger is reflecting now in what we're dealing with right now. So hopefully the situation moves from talking about the thing that everybody's arguing about to what are the feelings I'm really reacting with for? I think a lot of it goes back to how we were programmed. It's sort of like we're grooves on a record, and we are taught how to express anger, and that method is put into the record player. It's a groove. And now when we get into our real life and as adults and in relationships, we might want to listen to a different song. But it's very hard to get that record to skip and approach it differently.
And yet there's something so satisfying about being able to break the chain or change the pattern or move on to the next song. There's something so incredibly rewarding there. And I can speak to that personally with anger because the modeling that I had is completely different than the modeling that I've given my own child. And I'm so grateful for that, right? And yet at the same time now I can be where I am in my life and look back and go, whoa.
Yeah.
You were so angry at, once upon a time, and how lovely it is to be on the other side of that and to not have passed that along.
Yeah. I'm interested to hear you mention being a parent, because having a child is, I think, I tell clients it's either the cheapest or the most expensive form of therapy you can get.
No doubt.
I personally had an experience with my daughter that is every parent probably experiences, which is the anger at them not doing their homework. I remember sitting at the table, pounding my fist. My daughter refused to do the math. We have huge fights about it. And then what happened is I had a client who had a similar issue, and he was talking about the difficulty of teaching his daughter math. But my pitch to him is, what we're really doing here is you're teaching your daughter how to be angry, right? You're teaching your daughter how to react to frustration. And if the way you deal with anger is to pound on the table and raise your voice, that's how your daughter's going to learn how to deal with it. We can also teach our our children to recognize that the anger might be misplaced. I am really frustrated that you're not doing the math. God, it makes me so angry. I don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
Verbalizing a little bit more and identify it. I think examples like that, it's amazing how I feel I love being a parent, but I feel selfish about it because my kids are just opportunities for me to actually learn more about myself.
Oh, I know, to become a better person every day.
Right.
I'd love for you to share with us whatever might be bubbling up in your mind that you think would be helpful and supportive for this holiday season for our listeners. And then, of course, we'll definitely let people know where they can get a copy of your book and reach you as well.
Well, man, I would encourage everybody out there who is dealing with relatives or family members that there's conflict and anger. I almost picture myself like Gandhi at a certain point. I'm no Gandhi, I'll put it like that. But the idea that by not feeling like you have to reply or act in anger as a reaction to anger, you have the power to change the whole dynamic of the room. And it's so difficult because it's interesting, as you mentioned, the pleasure in changing your behavior. There's also so much pleasure in just being angry. It is so satisfying to feel you're right. I have the right to be angry. I am allowed because of X, Y, and Z. And it's very hard to break that chain and simply feel somebody's anger or frustration and not feel like it has to be matched.
Right, because most of the time it's not about you anyway.
Yes, exactly. And if you can realize that somebody's anger, while directed at you, is not intended for you, that empathy, that's why I believe there are really no bad people. There's people who have learned to be angry and express that anger in certain ways. So that's something that I work with the clients and with my family in realizing that, this person's really angry right now, and I think they're wrong. But it's not really up to me to make them see that, because nobody ever has an argument over the holidays with a discussion of the facts and then agree. Oh yeah, okay, we got it now. We're all on the same page. It never happens.
And then finally, with the anxiety that bubbles up, you might have the most loving, easygoing family and friends in the world and still feel some social anxiety this time of year. Do you have any suggestions for
I do. In
that?
fact, I just posted a excerpt of my book up at psychologytoday.com.
Okay.
And the chapter is called The Eternal Well of Worry. And the idea is that anxiety exists for all of us, and that there's sort of a well inside ourselves with a constant supply of water, which is anxiety. And that sometimes we feel the need to bail out that well. Let's empty that well. Let's drag every bucket and just really get into this anxiety, because eventually we'll get through it all. But the reality is it's never ending. It's an eternal source. But if we let that well simply rise up to the top of the well, it doesn't overflow. So we all have this tendency towards anxiety. And it's very difficult to sit with it and be okay with it, because it makes us uncomfortable. And when it makes us uncomfortable, we react in ways that we try to mitigate it or to make it feel better. But often it just exacerbates it. So I think the point of that metaphor is to understand that we can all experience anxiety. We can all be anxious, and we can sit with it and accept it, and in a way disempower it a little bit, or take away the ability for it to really make us feel like we need to do something to change it.
Thank you, Phil. What a pleasure to spend this time with you. I really am grateful that you chose to come and speak with me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You can get a copy of Phil's book, Dude, Where's My Car-tharsis, wherever books are sold. You can also contact Phil at starktalk.net.